What kind of child grows up and then decides they no longer want a relationship with their parents? Not distance, not space, complete separation. For many people, this feels unthinkable. And yet, millions of adults quietly make this decision every year. They stop answering calls. They avoid family gatherings. Eventually, they cut contact completely. But here's the part almost no one talks about. Children rarely cut their parents off suddenly. It's usually the end of a very long psychological process that started years earlier. A process that most people never see. You might recognize some of these experiences. You feel a strange tension every time your phone lights up with their name. Not fear exactly, but a tightness in your chest. A mental calculation. You rehearse what you're going to say before you answer. And even after the conversation ends, you feel drained. You notice that time with them doesn't feel comforting. It feels like work. Like you're managing someone else's emotions. Or trying not to trigger something. Sometimes the guilt hits you out of nowhere. Because part of you thinks, they're my parents. I shouldn't feel this way. And yet another part of you feels relief whenever there's distance. Relief you can't easily explain. If any of that feels familiar, this video will make sense of something most people misunderstand. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some children eventually distance themselves from their parents, why that decision is rarely impulsive, and the deeper psychological pattern that often develops long before the separation ever happens. But there's one hidden behavior that many people who cut their parents off carry into adulthood. Most of them don't even realize it's connected. We'll come back to that later. To understand this pattern, you have to start with a simple psychological truth. Children are wired to bond with their parents. Not casually, not optionally. Survival-level bonding. A child's brain is designed to seek closeness, approval, and safety from the people raising them. In psychology, this is often explained through attachment theory. When caregivers respond consistently and safely, the child learns something powerful. The world is predictable. Relationships are safe. But when the environment becomes emotionally unstable, unpredictable, or invalidating, the child's brain adapts. Not by rejecting the parents, but by trying harder. Much harder. Children don't naturally distance themselves from caregivers. They adapt to them. If the parent is unpredictable, the child becomes hyper-aware. If the parent is emotionally overwhelming, the child learns to manage emotions that were never theirs to carry. If the parent dismisses feelings, the child learns to silence their own. These are not personality traits. They are survival strategies. Over time, these adaptations can show up in subtle ways. You become extremely careful with your words around them. You scan their mood the moment you walk into the room. You learn which topics are safe, and which ones will cause conflict. You apologize quickly, even when you're not sure what you did wrong. You suppress your opinions because disagreement feels dangerous. And eventually, you start feeling like you can't fully exist around them. Not as yourself, but as a version of yourself that keeps the peace. Here's something people rarely realize. Most adult children who cut contact didn't start by trying to leave. They started by trying to fix the relationship. They explained their feelings. They tried to set boundaries. They hoped things would improve. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for decades. But when those attempts repeatedly fail, something slowly changes inside the mind. Not anger. Not rebellion. Something quieter. Exhaustion. And this is where the psychological shift begins. Because the very coping strategy that protected you as a child starts harming you as an adult. The hyper-awareness. The emotional management. The constant self-editing. As a child, these behaviors kept the relationship stable. They reduce conflict. They help you stay safe. But as an adult, they become draining. Every interaction requires emotional labor. Every conversation feels like walking through a field of hidden traps. And eventually, your nervous system begins to recognize something important. This relationship no longer feels safe. Here's the surprising part. For many people, the decision to cut contact isn't driven by anger. It's driven by clarity. Clarity that certain patterns are unlikely to change. Clarity that every interaction reopens the same emotional wounds. Clarity that distance might be the only way to stop repeating the cycle. And when that realization arrives, it often brings an unexpected emotion. Grief. Because the decision isn't just about losing a relationship. It's about letting go of the hope that the relationship will one day become what you needed it to be. But there is a deeper psychological mechanism underneath all of this. Something that begins forming long before adulthood. The brain learns patterns about safety. If your early environment repeatedly required emotional self-protection, your mind starts building internal rules. Rules like, keep the peace. Don't upset them. Your feelings will make things worse. Over time, these rules become automatic. You don't consciously think them. Your nervous system simply follows them. And when you grow older, those same patterns often show up in other relationships too. You over-explain yourself. You struggle to set boundaries. You feel responsible for other people's emotions. You tolerate situations that quietly exhaust you. Not because you want to, but because your brain learned early on that maintaining harmony was necessary for survival. So when someone finally distances themselves from a parent, it's rarely a sudden rebellion. It's often the moment their mind recognizes something it couldn't recognize as a child. You are allowed to protect yourself. And this is where the identity shift begins. Because many people carry enormous guilt about this decision. They think it means they're ungrateful, cold, disloyal. But psychology tells a different story. Children adapt to survive their environment. If a child learned to emotionally withdraw, people please, or distance themselves later in life, that was not weakness. That was adaptation. Your mind did what it needed to do to keep functioning in a difficult emotional environment. And awareness of this pattern can change something important. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually. Because once you recognize the survival strategy, you begin noticing where it still operates. You notice the relationships where you overextend yourself. You notice the moments when guilt overrides your boundaries. You notice how often you prioritize emotional stability for others at your own expense. And awareness creates a new possibility. Choice. You begin asking different questions. Not, how do I keep everyone comfortable? But, what actually feels healthy for me? For some people, that awareness eventually allows them to rebuild healthier boundaries with their parents. For others, distance remains the healthiest option. Both paths exist. Both can be valid. Because healing is not about forcing reconciliation. It's about understanding the patterns that shaped you. And the final insight most people miss is this. Children who cut their parents off are rarely trying to escape their past. They're trying to stop repeating it. And sometimes, distance isn't rejection. It's the first boundary a person ever learned how to hold.